You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Light rail, what's that? Is it some kind of train?
Distinguishing heavy rail used by freight trains from light rail and convincing the public to embrace the concept for Greater Cincinnati has entered a new stage with the release of a recent video. Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Local governments and citizen groups, with the assistance of the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Council of Governments, OKI, have been studying the feasibility of a light rail system in the I-71 corridor for 5 years. If you have followed this issue at all, you certainly know that developing a light rail system from scratch is expensive, costing as much as $45 to $50 million a mile. Given that, does it make sense? To discuss that and other questions about the light rail option, I am joined by two people. John Schneider is a local developer and the chair of the Alliance for Regional Transit. Haynes Goddard is a professor of economics at the University of Cincinnati. Professor Goddard has been taking a look at other systems, and particularly the Dallas area regional transit, popularly known as DART. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Good morning. Thank you.
John, where do we stand right now with this process? This has been going on. You've been here to talk about this before. No, not necessarily too long, but it's been going on. Where do we stand with this process at the moment?
I honestly think it's finally starting to gain traction. Tom Nyer has taken the reins of the leadership of both the I-71 corridor and the whole regional system. The business community is getting engaged. It's ceased becoming a planning project. It's starting to become a community civic project. It's going to go somewhere now.
Okay. Just to make sure that everybody's clarified and on the same page, I want to take a look at the map for this basic first proposal, and we can bring that up. The current proposal calls for an 18-mile route from Covington to Blue Ash. Proposed additions would then extend that route to the airport and Florence on the southwest and to Mason on the northeast, thereby linking the region's two most important growth centers. Now, Haynes, with that initial input of 18 miles and then the extensions, what do you think that basic core, basic spine, how should we think about doing that? It's very expensive. How should we evaluate whether that's worth going ahead with?
Well, it is expensive, as you mentioned, but the reason it is expensive initially is because we're doing the most difficult part of the system first. The downtown is already built up, and the initial route would take it through built-up area. Cincinnati is a mature area. There's a talk of a tunnel. There's a bridge to connect the Kentucky side. So the cost that will be generated by the first segment of the system really overstate what the total costs are going to be in the system later on. They drop to about half of what they are initially.
So if we say it costs $45 million a mile on this initial 18-mile section, what's it going to cost, say, when we start building it out to the I-75 corridor and that sort of thing?
We anticipate half that or less.
Okay.
And you have to remember the alternatives. The cost in an urban area in this region to add one lane to Interstate 71 or 75 is about $70 to $90 million a mile, almost twice as much.
And that why is that? Why is it so expensive to add what seems like to something we already have?
Well, we also have valleys, very tight valleys. For instance, in the valley right here by Channel 12, you probably would have a lot of difficulty cutting that back and widening that highway to put another lane in. How would you get another lane through the Lytle Tunnel? The Brent Spence Bridge is already maxed out. How would you put another lane on that? We, in mature cities like Cincinnati, at some point, it's not feasible to widen highways anymore. You need to move people in other ways. And remember, when you widen the highway, you have to widen all the arterials that connect with the highway. You have to widen the interchanges. In 75, drive down 75. If you widen it, every bridge, every interchange has to be set back, has to be widened.
And I think that's the key. That was the point that you've made in the past for me. As I drive along the expressway and I realize, gee, as I go under this overpass, there isn't any place to put another one.
Right.
So you'd have to rebuild, you don't just add a lane, you have to rebuild the whole thing in order to create the space.
And then look at the sound walls of communities. Communities aren't tolerating the noise cone from the freeway. Are they going to want another lane of freeway? Are they going to give up the land? We did a lot of that in the 50s and 60s around here. I don't think people were ready to widen highways through their neighborhoods anymore.
You know, one of the things is to look at the cost of light rail versus adding lanes to an expressway. From an economic point of view, from an economist's point of view, how else do you evaluate the impact of light rail? I mean, what other factors should you look at, and what's the payoff? How do you find the payoff for something like that?
Well, there are a number of categories that are examined. One is congestion relief and the time savings that are generated, time and money savings generated to commuters. Another one is that light rail has demonstrated impacts on land use around light rail stations. We saw a presentation last week by some representatives of the Dallas system. And Dallas, I think by all evaluations, is doing their approach to light rail planning properly. They own a lot of the property. They can control the way the developers develop the land around their stations, and have had really huge impacts. So what it does is it makes the economic activity around the stations and around the whole line much more compact than it would have been otherwise. So this generates what are called walkable communities, and leads to residential activity, commercial activity that you can walk to. The residents can walk to the drugstores in their area, to the dry cleaners, to the restaurants, and so on.
You know, if you were talking about this first 18 miles going through the mature, developed city, so some of those stations, and you'd have to look at the specific places, are going to be in the old city neighborhoods. It could be in the center of Walnut Hills. It could be up by the University of Cincinnati. I don't know those right off the top of my head, but be that as it may, what you're saying here, Haynes, is that a lot of those old cluster communities, neighborhoods that had neighborhood business districts that have all died away for the most part, this could re-stimulate them. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And create new ones as well.
It will re-stimulate. But face it, the interstate highways have bypassed large sections of our city, and I mean Kentucky and Cincinnati, the whole area.
The region.
That Cincinnatians have invested in for 200 years. What light rail will do will be put those neighborhoods back on the main line again. It will add value. They will be on the main flow of traffic. That's an important thing for areas that will never get highways. You're never going to run an interstate highway through over the Rhine, up the side of Mount Auburn, and to the University of Cincinnati. But 2 lines of light rail can be done in 35 feet. In a city that's short of land, that's built to the edges of the Ohio River and to the hilltops, that's an important thing for Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky to think that way.
You know, one of the things that we were talking about costs, and I'd like to just show a little bit of a chart about where this money is going to be coming from. The 50% of it, as I understand, is estimated, they're expected, hoped for, that will come from federal dollars. Actually, we're in slightly different. This is the rail cost. That first 18 miles is going to cost about $800 million. That accounts for 18 miles of tracks and approximately 20 stations, as well as a tunnel under Mount Auburn and a new bridge over the Ohio River. As you said, those are very expensive things. We're sitting on top of Mount Auburn. Be careful, don't be digging while this show's on, please. But the other thing on the cost side, how that gets paid for, 50% from federal dollars, and the other 50% from some mix of state and local dollars, which I understand is still unclear at this point exactly how that gets put together. You know, I think it's important, historian that I am, I always think in these terms, the interstate system, the federal dollars normally were 90%. Is that correct?
That's right.
So those cars have been subsidized for 50 years at 90% from federal dollars.
And highways don't have to jump through the hoops that light rail systems have to. The Interstate Highway Program has been a great program. I think it's President Eisenhower's lasting legacy of the country that he championed that and have it. It's done a lot of great things. And I think probably the 50-50 ratio is about right. That's what most cities are doing right now. We can't rely on the feds to do this for us.
What other cities are doing this? Are we out ahead of people?
We are not out ahead of people. Cincinnati is, for in the top 25 metro areas, we'll be fighting it out with Kansas City to see who gets it last, okay? But let me tell you who's doing it. Austin, Texas is probably going to build light rail very soon. Sacramento, California. Salt Lake City is working on its second line. San Diego is planning its fifth line. Portland, its third, has progressed so far that they have a lot of private financing in the third line. Really, Cincinnati is the exception in the fact that we don't have anything started at this point. And we need to catch up. I mean, there's a labor shortage. We need to attract the best people here, and they're used to these systems. I mean, people coming from big cities from all around the world have these kind of systems.
You know, when we were looking at that map before for the initial system, we have another map for the mature system that I'd like to put up, because it not only is the I-71 corridor, but it's the I-75 corridor, and there's some other spurs. You see something going off to the Western Hills there, something going out east to Milford, a variety of elements there to that mature system. Haynes, one of the things that comes to my mind, though, is even as I look at that map, it still looks to me like fundamentally a hub and spoke approach, whereas because expressways being what they are, and because of beltways redefining the functional boundaries of a city, is this really going to satisfy the way the future city is going to be? Is this the right system to be building, or should we be thinking outside the interstate corridors?
Well, it's part of the solution. We wouldn't want to build light rail in every direction to every community. It would be vastly too expensive. But the plans that we're talking about and being discussed in the community include a very substantial bus component. So while the light rail system is basically hub and spoke to the downtown, which is the major center of employment in the region, will continue to be for a long time, there will be, as part of the planning for future transit, very substantial investments in bus connections. And those can go east-west to make connections between the suburbs farther out from the center.
You know, I have to say that in relation, and I don't think this is so much a problem in northern Kentucky, because I think the way Tank is funded and the way it's put together, it's doing a lot of
funded by 3 counties in northern Kentucky.
Right. And going in a lot of different directions.
Right.
Over here, Metro is still only funded basically by the city. And once it gets beyond the city limits, it's still a very weak system. We're going to have to think about much more effective bus system too here, right?
That's right. And that's indeed part of the planning.
And the bus system will become less concentrated on downtown. It will move out to 7 or 8 transit centers, especially around the University of Cincinnati. The fact that people wanting to go to UC have to come downtown and transfer, that's wrong. UC is a large center. You know, I've been watching this sprawl debate out here. I think it's very interesting. It's clear people think something's wrong, okay? They don't know what the solution is. I think people want development. They may not want growth anymore, physical, horizontal growth, but they want, I think, development. They want to put development in places that can handle it. And those areas are a lot of areas of the inner city that already have sewers, that already have playgrounds and schools and all this other stuff you can't see, fiber optics, that kind of stuff. Those areas are underinvested in, and I think at the margin we're going to start attracting investment back to those areas, and people that really don't want that growth in their communities will be glad for it.
You know, one of the things that struck me when you were talking about the places that this is being developed, Austin, Sacramento area, these are places that are also pushing forward in high-tech areas, and there's a lot of things that feed together, and of course you're talking about underinvestment in the inner city, places like over the Rhine, where whatever high-tech we've got is sort of, you know, emerging there.
Over the Rhine is the biggest beneficiary of the initial phase of the light rail. More people will be on the trains going through over the Rhine than any other section of the system. That's value. When you have people going up and down that street and seeing what's there, people who would never be exposed to that community, that's what really starts to change the equation here. And also, finally now connecting downtown with the University of Cincinnati, which are only 2 miles apart, but one on a hill and one in a valley. That's what's really going to drive that whole system, that whole urban spine, all the way from Xavier down through a point in Kentucky. It'll be a different kind of city when we have light rail.
Haynes, what would you like to see Greater Cincinnati as a community do next? What do we need to do to get our hands around this issue?
Well, one issue that I'm really interested in is the economic benefits and cost of the system. Based on what we've seen in other communities, it has really large beneficial impacts that I would see no reason why that wouldn't be true here as well. What I would like to see us show in some numbers is that if the welfare of the community, the general economic welfare of the community, can be shown to be better off with a system like this, and I think a benefit cost analysis can help us understand that, then we'll have a powerful argument to give to the community. And since we do have to raise probably 50% of the funding for this, we should then be able to identify out of this increased wealth that a light rail system would create, ways we can capture part of that wealth and invest in the system and still be better off.
Okay, so if it stimulates certain development, creates wealth that should be able to be plowed back in.
Well, even more than that, we can ask this kind of question. What kind of development needs to take place around stations and in the region in general in order to make a system like this make sense? And then that gets lots of folks involved, the local communities, the planning organizations in their communities, developers, to take a look at what smart growth really would mean and what do they need to do to make the system look good.
John, we got less than a minute here, but this is going to be an interstate system. I mean, Greater Cincinnati being regional. From a funding point of view, practically speaking, can tax dollars raised in Ohio be used in Kentucky or vice versa?
That's actually the attorneys for SORNA and Tank who will operate the system and who are taking the leadership on the next phase of it. Have their attorneys have said as long as, for instance, all but one of Tank's routes now terminate in Ohio. And as long as residents of Kentucky benefit from it, yes, they can invest in Ohio. There has to be a linkage between where the taxes are collected and the benefits that they get from it.
Well, thank you very much for being here, and this is going to be an ongoing discussion, and I hope to have you back in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. After the break, we shift topic. Here's a hint.
You've never known of a whistling child to get in the child delinquency or be a child problem or anything else. And another thing is, I don't believe that they allow whistling behind the Iron Curtain.
Welcome back. In 1956, even the simplest things were understood in terms of Cold War rivalries. Blah, blah. In fact, humans have whistled throughout time, some better than others, if you've ever heard me or Cammie Durking for that matter. And this morning I am joined by Emily Eagen, a recent winner at the Allied Whistlers Convention. Emily is also a trained singer, a lyric mezzo-soprano, with degrees in voice from Macalester College and the University of Wisconsin. Emily, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thanks for having me.
I know a little bit about you because of you growing up and going to school with my daughter, so I knew you were a trained musician. How did you ever get into whistling?
I think whistling was the first thing I actually ever did, because I remember learning to whistle. I remember my dad teaching me to whistle Davy Crockett, and I must have been about 4 or 5. And at that point, I was already playing the piano and violin, but it was kind of all at once. Like, I think I did it before I sang.
Can you still whistle Davy Crockett?
Sure.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, you know. But, okay, it's one thing, we all whistle. I whistle in my car with the windows up.
Right.
It's a big leap, though, to then say, gee, I'm going to do this a little bit more seriously and publicly. When did you start doing that?
A friend who I went to college with knew that I whistled. And there was a talent show at the beginning of the, kind of to get to know everyone in college. And he kept saying, Emily, you have to go whistle, you have to go whistle. It was Ben Ruhmkorff, who you know. And he, so he was convincing me the only way I would do it was wearing a hat over my eyes. So I went up to the microphone with my hat here, and everyone was doing, you know, different kind of much more colorful acts like juggling or acting and stuff. And I just came up and whistled right in the mic. And I remember I had to have my eyes covered because I would either laugh or just kind of freak out and leave the stage. And so instead I just stood there with my hat and whistled.
And how was it received?
The effect was really great because it was just a pure mic through this enormous dining hall. And I think it sounded great. I mean, it was the first time I'd ever gotten to do that, and the way it gets amplified with the microphone is
now,
really
a lot
unique.
of your voice training has been in classical music.
Right.
And in reading about the International Whistlers Convention, there were these different categories that you competed in, and one of them was classical, right? Right. Tell me about that. One, why would you do that? And secondly, can you give us a demonstration?
Sure. Well, basically, I selected from operatic repertoire. I selected a piece that I do sing called Una voce poco fa. It's from Barbara Seville. And then I picked kind of a dream piece that I'll never ever sing because it's totally not in my voice type, but it's the Queen of the Night from Mozart's Magic Flute. Okay. So I'll whistle you a little of that.
Okay.
Let's see. I picked a little high key. It has those florid arpeggios, which I did a cappella, and most people actually perform with the recording of orchestral or piano. And so to do it a cappella really exhibited the whistling in a way that isn't typically done at the competition. So it seemed to be to my advantage.
Has anybody ever written for whistling? Written music for whistling?
Let's see. A friend wrote a piece for me, actually.
Really?
It's called Diary of a Mad Woman. And in it, it's this woman that goes through all these emotional shifts, most of it singing, but to kind of capture the fact that at one moment she's sort of deliriously happy and is whistling in a state of fancy. It worked better to have it whistling than singing, and it kind of showcased everything.
Do you know that off the top of your head?
It's complicated because it's an art song with piano, but she just kind of goes, you know, has this moment of fancy, and then she returns to the things that are driving her crazy.
Now, okay, whistling, there's this Whistlers contest, which has been going on for quite some time, right? 27 years or something?
Yeah.
But has whistling, I understand whistling does have a performance history to it, too. There have been other whistlers.
Yep. I was just reading about a couple women whistlers, which is interesting because whistling for a long time was considered a taboo for women to do. And then I think around the end of the Victorian era, more women started becoming public whistlers. There were women that opened a couple Carnegie libraries, I think one of them in Ohio, that just were sort of ceremonial, you know, guests that
And
was
the Carnegie libraries, we have a number of them here in Cincinnati.
Yeah, exactly.
Which were donated by the Carnegie Foundation, by Andrew
Right.
Carnegie. They're wonderful architecture usually, and so
Right.
they'd be big public events.
Exactly. And as opposed to now where I think whistling is seen as more of a stunt, in that period, especially before recordings existed, it was considered a really kind of a virtuosic thing to whistle. There was a woman named Alice Shaw who would go over to Europe and whistle for royalty there. You know, so.
And really had a huge impact.
Exactly.
I mean, you shared an article with
Right.
me. And my understanding is now this is, we're taping on Friday, this is going to air on Sunday. I understand that you're going to have a chance to do some whistling in connection with the Fountain Square.
Right. I'm going to whistle at the reception, which is after the actual ceremony, but I think it's a reception for the people involved in the project.
What are you going to whistle?
So I'm going to whistle, I believe, some patriotic things, like the Star Spangled Banner, and I'm not sure what the other piece is going to be. But
Give me a little Star Spangled
Okay.
Banner. Can you imagine yourself becoming Alice Shaw and maybe going to Europe and becoming the hit of London and then going on to Paris? Could you imagine that? I mean, she had a whole career. I
Yeah,
mean,
she
recordings,
did.
the whole thing.
I don't know if that's the kind of thing that happens today, but it's funny because the main place that whistling is mentioned in papers is in obituaries, which either indicates that it's something people do kind of intimately on their own, or it's something that's considered more of a hallmark of a previous generation.
So sort of a family thing.
I don't know if
too.
whistling is going to make a big comeback, but I found ways to combine it with singing that I think.
You still committed to
keep
your
doing.
singing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Now, thank you for being with us.
Thank
and
you.
I want you to, as we leave this morning, we're going to roll some credits, to play something, accompany yourself with your guitar, which
Okay.
is something that you did at the competition as well. Is that correct?
Yes, and folk music in general has a big space for that, just to whistle a verse, sing a verse. You know, there's a long tradition of that too.
Okay.
So.
Why don't you get ready? Let
Okay.
me thank you for being with us on Newsmakers here this morning. Join us again next week, and take the next 45 seconds or so and enjoy Emily Eagen. Have a good week.
Thank you for having me.